Welcome to God with George Ortega. This is episode number 70. I'm recording it on Thursday, January 28th at 2:03 p.m. Eastern Time. And this is another experiment. I just attended a Talmud class, and after having attended a Torah class recently and having an exceptionally, I believe, good episode that I recorded after that. I want to see if that happens again. Hopefully, I think to a certain extent it has to happen because basically it was a very good class. The rabbi who taught it is very intelligent, very knowledgeable. The entire group is very intelligent, knowledgeable, and that motivates, causes, influences a heightened sense of intelligence in whoever might participate in or listen to it. In my case, it's certainly the same. So now what's interesting is that I just decided I didn't plan to or no, I didn't decide before what exactly I was going to talk about. So now I've got to like wait for God to talk to me about that. So okay, let's just the first thought that comes to mind is the basic question, without which everything would be much more acceptable, or without which without a need for which everything would be much more. And then the basic question is, and I was talking to someone earlier about this, and we asked this, we didn't come up with an answer, but I think it could be that if we ask it over and over in 10 years, in 100 years, a couple of 100 years, we may find an answer. And the question is, given that God is the creator of our world, in this case, our universe, beginning with the Big Bang. And that because of that, God is both everything, omnipotent, and omniscient. Coupled with God having created us as sentient beings capable of feeling both pleasure and pain, and the very certain understanding of God as wanting our best interests, then the question, of course, becomes, why did God create conditions for suffering, conditions for evil? And relative to this, I just was dialoguing with a rabbi about the point that a different rabbi, that scientifically, you go back 300 million years to the emergence of decapods, 10-limbed sea creatures like lobsters and crabs. Before that, there was no pain or suffering or pleasure or enjoyment either on Earth, because organisms on this planet hadn't yet evolved the necessary neurological apparatus to experience the sentience. So on the one hand, that's positive, in our almost 14 billion year history as a universe. On this planet, pain and suffering has only been around 1/50th, for the last 50th of the time. but again, the basic question, why should suffering exist at all? And then we might also bring into this, because like some people will say, well, a world without suffering wouldn't allow us to develop our character. It might be boring. It wouldn't be as good a world. And I powerfully, at least according to logic, would challenge that, in the sense that, for example, there are many traditions within Judaism um, regarding what happens after we die, and presumably where we were, if anywhere, before we were born. And one of the traditions is that when we die, we go to a place with God of perfect goodness, where we can only do good, and perfect bliss, where we're basking in God's glory and in God's bliss eternally. So then the question becomes, well, if that's what we, I believe, rightly consider the optimal, the supreme state of being for human beings, certainly I don't think one could claim that that existence would be either boring or less of an experience, because it doesn't lead to greater character development or the ability to to face suffering and grow from it and all. So, but again, we still haven't answered the question, which is God is all knowing and is all powerful and is everything. So the everything part is interesting, because it's not, it's more than God afflicting us sentient beings, human beings and other animals. It's also God afflicting God. So why, again, if you were God, why would you afflict yourself? And I choose to believe that we can conceive of God in God's totality, that includes we human beings and other life forms like us that are sentient. Throughout the universe, you know, theoretically there could be an infinite number of these kinds of species. Um, I All right, so like I was going there, and all of a sudden God said, "All right, enough of this." Like, so He's bringing me back to. So again, why would God um, cause suffering, cause Himself to suffer, cause us to suffer? And while I don't have an answer to that, there is reason for hope and optimism. And the hope and optimism is that, fine, the world does right now contain suffering, but for the vast majority of people, it contains far less suffering than it did 100 years ago, and 1,000 years ago, and perhaps 10,000 years ago. And so we're going in the right direction, which is again cause for optimism and appreciation. And there's a stronger reason, though, that I feel confident, if we are able to wisely navigate climate change, that we are moving into a reality where, at least for human beings, we will exist in a state of virtually complete bliss, uh, little or no pain, and complete virtue, or virtually complete virtue. And that is because our physiology, we're hardwired by God through evolution to seek pleasure and avoid pain. That is our fundamental motivation as human beings. So, and that motivation initially operates within each individual, but it also operates within the collective, perhaps not as strongly and completely, but people collaborate for the mutual benefit of everyone. So that gives me great hope that we are hardwired. Again, we are designed to think and do and say and feel what we believe is going to lead to greater happiness, greater virtue. Virtue, I'm defining as what creates happiness, so they're very interconnected. And so, yes, we as people make many mistakes in that endeavor, but we also have gotten a lot right. Medicine, I think, is probably our best example. We are able to keep ourselves so much healthier, to live so much longer, to enjoy life so much more, because we have applied this operating principle of seeking pleasure and avoiding pain to understanding our reality well enough to be able to understand ourselves physiologically, and then like use that understanding to both keep ourselves healthy and to cure illness. So so yeah, and it's interesting because now we can like move on to, well, how are we going to do that? How are we going to create a world for everyone where everyone is virtually in a state of bliss and virtually always virtuous? And here's where we may be moving into a paradigm changing revolution in how we approach that endeavor. Until now, our primary strategy for this has been through teaching, through learning wisdom about how to become happier, how to become better, how to distinguish better right from wrong. And it's all been a matter of learning, learning concepts, learning principles. And and that this has been, I believe, the one of the primary gifts of religion. Religion is, the institution, the human institution devoted to this quest for the knowledge of what will make us happier and what will make us more virtuous so that we'll become happier. And so now the shift we're moving into, and it's not like they're mutually exclusive. It could be that religion leads us to this new revolution. And this revolution relates to medicine. For example, in psychiatry, we have developed psychopharmacological tools to address our fear and anxiety, tranquilizers, sedatives. They take these very unpleasant emotions, feelings that we experience. It sometimes can become debilitating, and they either lessen them or sometimes completely eliminate them. Another example is we tend to become sad or depressed, just really disheartened. And so we have developed agents that address that, antidepressants that cause depressed people to feel better. So let's consider that these kinds of agents are relatively new in medicine, several decades old. And now consider the advance of medicine, technology, computer science, artificial intelligence, machine learning. Our knowledge of the human body, of the human mind, is accelerating rapidly. And this knowledge is, of course, accelerating rapidly because of the internet, because of the interconnectivity of our world, where somebody can discover something on one continent and 2 minutes later it can be known by everyone, in every continent. And so I believe that I hope that religious institutions, organizations, people, we as a human race will recognize that, yes, learning morality and learning happiness, the wisdom of happiness, has been effective. We are living better lives now than ever before, to a great extent because of this knowledge. And of course, knowledge that's ancillary to this, that relates to having enough food, having proper shelter, just this technology that indirectly facilitates greater happiness. So, so that's going to be interesting. That basically, again, Ray Kurzweil, Google engineer, top Google engineer, wrote a book called The Singularity is Near that deals with world-changing developments in medicine that we can expect over the next decades. I'm not sure he addresses these themes of greater happiness and greater virtue. And I want to review the book. I've only actually read about a third to a half of it because it's a 700-page book and he really gets into a lot of detail. But actually, there's another book, much less popular, by a much less popular British philosopher, David Pearce, who I believe in 1993 wrote a book called The Hedonic Imperative, where he foresees using our knowledge of chemistry, our knowledge of biology and physiology to engineer, either genetically or through agents, um, a global society where the standard, basic, everyday state of each person is complete bliss. And that could be achieved in various ways. Um, let's say we're able to identify the centers of our brain that cause displeasure, like anxiety and anger and sadness. And let's say we can manipulate these areas in a way that allows them to communicate their messages, because fear and anger and sadness and other negative emotions have their use in protecting us from danger and alerting us to what we need to do to respond to various situations. But imagine being able to tweak those centers so they're conveying this information, but without the pain. In other words, like a good example is like your hand is approaching a hot stove and the message isn't ouch, this hurts. The message is, whoa, the faster I take my hand away, the better I feel. So that's kind of like the theoretical principle behind how this could happen. Um, Another approach, of course, would be genetic engineering that would, have a similar basic aim. Um, all right, so now we've dealt with how we can get there. And really, this should be our fundamental, our primary goal as a human species, as a global population, because we may or may not be able to successfully navigate climate change. There are tragedies and disasters that befall us. We think we're doing something good, for example, with the Industrial Revolution, with fossil fuels, and it turns out several decades later that we discover we're doing something extremely dangerous, and creating a lot of harm. So what I want to say now is that to meet the challenges of the future, um, the threats like climate change and future pandemics, and geopolitical, risks and threats, and to fast track this evolution of us as a human species into a much more blissful and virtuous state. It would be in our very best interest to begin this research now. All right, so having said that, we have to acknowledge that we as a species are not all that bright. We're not all that virtuous. If we were, and this is relative, I think in a lot of ways we are very bright and virtuous, but apparently we're not intelligent or virtuous enough to address these challenges, or even perhaps to appreciate this promised land of bliss here on earth, virtuous bliss here on earth through technology, through means that are different from our traditional means. So because of this, my approach, and perhaps it should be the approach of all of us, is to appeal to God. This is what this series is about. This series evolved from my 61 episode Cellular Agriculture for a Pandemic-Free Future that outlined what we need to do to prevent future pandemics, which is essentially transition from farming animals to growing our meat, fish, and dairy and eggs in laboratories in a way that protects us from future pandemics. And so I realized after 61 episodes and sending about 1,000 emails to media organizations, just informing them of this technology that many of them don't know about, that very few people are writing about, and then discovering that like months later, there isn't this widespread interest, either from politicians, from the business community, excuse me, even from advocates, animal rights advocates, or basically our factory farming is also responsible for about 15% of the greenhouse gases that cause climate change, and that is comparable to the entire transportation industry, planes, trains, ships, everything. So it's because of this acknowledgement that we don't have the means to, or we may not have, it looks like we don't have the means to address these challenges and create the kind of future that we could create. We appeal to God. And that, this makes consummate sense. I mean, we're commanded to appeal to God, by God, for help in what we can't do. That is what prayer is about. I mean, that's what petitionary prayer at least is about, asking God for help, clearly because our means are not sufficient to sufficiently address whatever it is we're asking for help about. And so it may be that that this means of prayer should be our fundamental or our primary strategy that will allow us, that will please God, that God will grant us the intelligence and the wisdom to pursue, the courses necessary to mitigate climate change and prevent future pandemics and create this future for humanity and perhaps other life forms as well, that is much, much more blissful, if not completely blissful. It's theoretically possible that we can engineer a blissful, state for human beings, and be a bit more difficult for other life forms. But to at least to make a giant leap in that doesn't take the decades that it would take for our sociological, approaches of teaching, disseminating wisdom, of creating laws that keep us more virtuous. This would be asking God for help in developing, let's say, a morality pill, that in 10 years, everyone takes a morality pill that's, safe and effective and takes one every day. And all of a sudden, people are so much far less capable of lying and stealing and doing whatever, the kinds of immoral acts that we do. And then we can take another pill that, like an antidepressant for normal people who aren't depressed, that takes the average happiness level of the average person and amplifies it 25, 50 times. There incidentally are people alive who have a condition, it's not an illness, called hyperthymic personality, and they are fortunate enough to, for the most part, be in a very blissful state. They're very gregarious. And so this kind of an agent, this kind of like a happiness pill, would allow us all to enjoy that blessing. All right, so the experiment was, would attending this Talmud class result in a better episode of this series if I recorded it immediately afterwards? And with 1 minute and 30 seconds left to go, I'd have to say absolutely. I feel this is probably my best episode. I hope that future episodes will be better, but this is definitely worked. So I'm going to attend the class in another couple of weeks, and naturally there are classes that that I will be attending before then, and let's see what we can do with this. All right, so we have about a minute left. Thank you for watching. Watch this series every. Hold on, watch this series every Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. on White Plains Community Media Channel 76 if you get Optimum, 45 if you get Verizon. And we'll continue. Again, this is an exploration for me as well as for you. We're going to hope that, for example, one of the questions are, fine, if we need God's help, what do we need to get there? What do we need to get ourselves to ask for God's help with this? How do we get closer? And this is to a great extent what this series is about. How do we understand God better so we can be closer to God, so we can ask God for what we need, so we can eventually be much more blissful and virtuous. Thanks for watching, and God willing, see you soon.